This is the second part of the interview with Ostap Kryvdyk. If you've missed the first part, watch it now.
On August 30th, 2025, Andriy Parubiy, a Ukrainian politician and former chairman of the Verkhovna Rada, was shot dead on the streets of Lviv. He was a very influential and important figure who shaped the political environment in Ukraine. I talked about Andriy Parubiy with Andriy Parubiy's close associate, Ostap Kryvdyk, a Ukrainian analyst who is currently also a soldier in the armed forces of Ukraine. Paweł Bobołowicz, welcome. Black Sky, Stop Fake. I just wanted to say that I had the impression that he was somewhere between the three political tenors, as they were called at the time, who were often somewhat detached from what was happening on Maidan. This was particularly evident during the events on Hrushevsky Street, where the attitude, especially that of Klitschko, was rejected because people simply wanted radical action.
It was the moment when the dictatorial laws were passed. I remember well how one of the leaders of the opposition trio, considered the most radical, said, "Now we will show the regime. We will hold elections to the Kiev City Council." It sounded completely out of touch with reality. After all, at that time, having a tire in the trunk, a helmet, or protective clothing was already considered a crime. And we were supposed to hold local elections. Of course, the politicians seemed unprepared at that moment. However, we used a certain stratagem. Within the Maidan Self-Defense, we agreed on a division of roles. Order was maintained by polite, disciplined boys in helmets and with shields, the official self-defense, and the barricades were attacked by the bad right sector. They were said to be radicals, an uncontrollable element, the spontaneous anger of the people. In reality, they were the same people. Those who patrolled the Maidan later put on masks, took Molotov cocktails, and went to the barricades on Hrushevsky Street. It was part of the strategy. It was about how to report on events, how to talk about them. Not everyone was ready to hear that Molotov cocktails were an adequate response to bullets that gouged out eyes and killed Nigoyan and Zhizhnevsky. This is an important point. Andriy often emphasized that the first victims on the Maidan were an Armenian and a Belarusian, not ethnic Ukrainians, and this path of Ukrainian nationalism, from conventional ethnic exclusivity, Ukraine for Ukrainians, to the understanding that Ukraine is a country of those who love it, believe in it, respect its culture and language. This is the path that Andriy Parubiy and I have taken. Maidan is a step that showed us the real Ukraine, broader than just the ethnic one.
And undoubtedly Andriy Parubiy saw this directly, and was well aware of it. I don't want this to sound like my constant criticism of the main political leaders, but Parubiy could be seen among the Maidan protesters, on the barricades, with the people. What you were talking about, meetings with sotniks, took place very often, certainly before key events. Sometimes they met several times a day. These were not easy conversations, because among these sotniks there were also comments and complaints directed at Parubiy, political in nature. He had to keep everything under control. The comparison with the Zaporozhian Cossacks seems very apt.
After all, there were the so-called wild Sotnias, units not coordinated by the staff, not subject to general discipline. Their commanders had to be talked to separately. Such dialogue continued, but some coordination did take place. There were people who did not want to be subordinate to anyone. This is probably the specific Ukrainian anarchy that lies dormant in society. We have to accept it because it is part of us.
And at the same time, it was the Maidan Self-Defense, immediately after the victory of the Revolution of Dignity, that actually became the main volunteer force that went to fight against the so-called separatists. Today, probably no one in Ukraine uses this term anymore, but at the time it was very popular, especially in the Western view of what was happening. They simply went to fight against the Russian occupation in the East.
This is how Russian propaganda portrayed some collaborators, among whom there were many agents. 2, 3, or 10 years ago, it was the Russian secret services, together with a group of manipulated, frightened residents who became the occupiers' helpers.
Термін «сепаратисти» був спеціально придуманий російськими спецслужбами як частина інформаційної війни.
I believe that the term separatists was coined by the Russian services as part of their information warfare. It was a way to call Russian aggression the Ukrainian crisis or civil war.
Андрій Парубій всіми силами намагався уникнути кровопролиття. Не є відома історія, але
Andriy Parubiy tried with all his might to avoid bloodshed. It is a little-known story, but even those deluded people in Donbas did not want bloodshed. They had had enough of Akhmatov and the oligarchs, who had plundered the region and plunged it into poverty. Andriy talked to them as an equal. He said, "Turn this into political demands. Go to the polls, enter parliament."
Ви повинні перетворити це в політичні вимоги. Ідіть на вибори, заходьте в український парламент. Після того,
But once blood was shed, once these people became puppets of the Kremlin, and some of them were simply eliminated by Russia, a political settlement became impossible. Russia did everything it could to provoke a war.
Ситуацію стали неможливими. Росія зробила все, щоб
Those Ukrainian citizens who took up arms against the state in Donetsk and Luhansk are now 100% collaborators and traitors. They will be held responsible for destroying their own homeland. They will have to go through the purgatory of the Ukrainian justice system, which provides for severe penalties for treason.
Чистилище українського закону, який передбачає суворе покарання за зраду України.
I would like to move on to the question of Andriy Parubiy's political activities in the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, but I think this is the right moment to thank Andriy Parubiy. I will do so through you. In March 2014, I accompanied Polish observers, a group that traveled to Donbas. The key moment was the funeral of Dmytro Cherniavsky, an assistant to a member of the Verkhovna Rada from the Svoboda party, who was killed during the Maidan in Donetsk, because that's how events unfolded there. The situation was very tense and volatile. We went to the funeral and fell into a trap because it turned out that a group was waiting for us outside our house. We don't know if they were local thugs, Russian mercenaries, or Russians themselves. We couldn't tell. But when they encountered us there, the situation became very dangerous. They wanted to beat us up. We managed to escape and take refuge in an apartment we had rented earlier, but we were aware that they were beginning to surround our building. The situation was very dangerous. We then contacted the Maidan Self-Defense forces, and thanks to their intervention, led by Parubiy, we were safely extracted from there and taken to another location. We managed to distract the attackers, and we still had in our memory the events of the Orange Revolution, when, in very similar circumstances, the apartment of people who had come from outside to observe the events was tragically burned down.
I have my own experiences from the time of the Orange Revolution. At that time, I was not yet working with Andriy. I was an activist in the Pora campaign. In 2004, we went to Donetsk with tents. There was an attack. There were about 50 attackers and 6 of us. It turned out to be a local boxing club. Then the 6 of us were arrested. Not the thugs who demolished the town and beat us up, but us. Unfortunately, it must be admitted that Russia had been operating in Donetsk for a long time and systematically. When the city was surrendered without a fight, it was handed over by local militiamen and SBU officers. These people were confused at best. At worst, they had long been paid agents of Moscow.
I remember that back then. In March 2014, we were still working in Donetsk for a few days, watching all these tragic events unfold. The occupation of Ukrainian institutions, the Security Service of Ukraine, and the Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine. I remember the moment when the Ukrainian flag was taken down in front of the Prosecutor's Office and replaced not with the flag of the so-called DNR, but with the Russian flag. The cheers that followed were terrible. Our safety was ensured at the time by the Maidan Self-Defense forces. And this is the moment I would like to express my sincere gratitude both to the guys who were directly with us and to those in Kyiv who stood behind us, knew and observed what was happening to us. But Andriy Parubiy did not choose the path of direct combat, although many people from the Maidan Self-Defense forces went straight to the front. Andriy Parubiy remained in the Verkhovna Rada. He was also the chairman of the Verkhovna Rada at a time when very important changes were taking place in Ukraine. After the Revolution of Dignity, in the years preceding the full-scale invasion, it was a period of enormous reforms in Ukraine, a European course, and Andriy Parubiy was then the chairman of the Verkhovna Rada. The same person we used to refer to as a radical Ukrainian nationalist is now the man who is opening Ukraine to the West, to the European Union, and to NATO.
For Andriy Parubiy, membership in the European Union and NATO was an axiom. Without anchoring Ukraine in Europe, we cannot be free, effective, or secure. The same applies to Europe. Without Ukraine, the continent will not be secure and therefore will not be prosperous.
Вся решта Європа без України не може бути безпечною, а відтак не може бути успішною і заможною, бо з безпеки все починається. Андрій Парубій це чітко бачив.
Andriy saw this clearly. He was the author of constitutional amendments that enshrined integration with the EU and NATO as a strategic priority. These institutions are not simple. We see how difficult it is for NATO to counter Russian hybrid aggression, which is directly aimed at the alliance. We see how there is no clear response when Russian drones fly over Poland, even when stray drones ended up there. 19 such machines flew into Polish airspace. I believe that if Ukraine were in NATO, it would be much more difficult for the Russians.
Повністю на НАТО, Україна стане членом НАТО наступного дня. Невже для цього потрібна трагедія Європи? Невже для цього потрібні збомблені Балтійські, польські, німецькі,
Andriy once jokes that if Russia launched a full-scale military attack on NATO, Ukraine would become a member of the alliance the next day. Is a tragedy in Europe really necessary for this? Do Baltic, Polish or German cities have to burn in order to recognize Ukraine's place in the security system? To understand that Russia is attacking us precisely because we are not in NATO and Europe is not united?
І подумайте добре, наскільки ви стратегічно бачите майбутнє вашої країни і те, як ви можете допомогти Україні. І мені здається, що в Британії
Andriy spoke about this candidly. I remember him saying in London, "Remember when Britain so easily gave Hitler the Sudetenland, a year and a half later, bombs were falling on London. Draw your own conclusions." It seems to me that this understanding is already taking root in Britain.
Польщі, паном Кухтінським. Після потиску рук перші слова, які Андрій Парубій сказав пану Кухтінському,
I wonder if this approach exists in Poland. Does Poland understand that Ukraine is crucial to prevent bombs from falling on Polish cities?
вивезено в Сибір.
I remember Andriy Parubiy's first meeting with Marshal Kuczynski.
Везли
Andriy's first words were,
мою бабцю і мого маленького однорічного батька везли на вантажівці з вугіллям в далекому Сибірі. Був страшний
My
голод, зазвичай
family survived
немовлята в такому
thanks to
холоді
the
не вживали.
Poles.
Це вирок смерті.
When we were
Єдине,
deported to
що нас
Siberia,
врятувало,
and my family was deported for belonging to the UPA, my grandmother and one-year-old father were transported in a coal truck. It was freezing in Siberia.
І
Babies usually didn't survive that. It was a death sentence. We were saved by a Polish family
дозвольте
who
вам
let them in to
подякувати
warm up.
від імені мого
Thanks to
батька
that,
за
my
його
father
порятунок.
survived. Let me thank you on his behalf
Це був той
for
тон,
saving us.
і це був той настрій, і це було те відчуття і те бачення, яке Андрій Парубій хотів принести в україно-польські стосунки.
This was the tone and vision that Andriy wanted to bring to our relations. He was aware of historical traumas and had a sober assessment of Polish interwar policy towards Ukrainians. But he understood that the Polish-Ukrainian alliance was the foundation of security for both nations.
Безпеки обидвох наших народів і наших країн. І якщо це союзництво буде підірване недовірою чи зруйноване,
If this alliance is undermined by mistrust, we risk everything.
перед могутнім російським ворогом.
Alone,
А
we
будувати
cannot
партнерство
stand
на
up to
недовір'ї та
Russia,
взаємній образі,
and a partnership
неможливо.
based on
Саме
resentment
тому
is
він ініціював
impossible.
спільну заяву Української Верховної Ради і польського Сейму, в якому було дуже чітко
That is why he initiated a joint statement by the Verkhovna Rada and the Sejm, clearly stating that the tragedy between our nations took place in a climate in which the Nazis were committing genocide and the Soviets were conducting sabotage, provoking
взаємні
conflicts.
кривди між українцями і поляками, в тому числі, ми не говоримо про роль нацистів, і ми не говоримо про роль совєтських спецслужб.
This is an important point. When talking about mutual grievances, we cannot ignore the role of the Nazis and the Soviet secret services, which fueled hatred. To forgive, you have to understand.
Пробачте, треба
It
зрозуміти.
seems to me
І мені
that
здається,
Andriy contributed
багато
greatly
доклався до
to
того,
this mutual understanding.
щоби поляки спробували зрозуміти нас, а ми поляків.
This was the second part of the interview with Ostap Kryvdyk. Don't miss the final part.